I'll take a nice tasty burrito with a side order of the anabolic steroid Deca, and I'll start eating it right now. What's up everybody, it's Dane Miller from GarageStrength.com, and if this is your first time to the channel and you're interested in becoming a better athlete, you're interested in understanding how a lot of athletes love to the fans, make sure that you like, you subscribe, and you ring that notification bell so we can help you become a beast. Some of you may or may not know and be aware of the fact that the 2016 Olympian, two-time national record holder in the 1500 and the 5000 meters, Shelby Houlihan, has recently tested positive for nandrolone.
And Olympic runner Shelby Houlihan says she's been banned from competing for 4 years after a drug test turned up positive for a banned steroid.
And one of the biggest things that Shelby Houlihan, the individual who tested positive for nandrolone, otherwise known as its street name Deca, has stated is that the reason why Deca got into her bloodstream, got into her urine, is from consuming pig offal, basically like pig organs, right? And so she claims that she was tested at the end of December by WADA, and the night before she consumed a burrito that had pig organs in it. And according to a couple studies, I think there's about one study, the organs of a pig is where there will be higher amounts of potential anabolics if these animals are fed anabolic steroids to help increase their mass, increase the size of the animal. And so her main claim is that that's where she got the nandrolone. That's how it got into her bloodstream. So let's go through this article from NPR and actually try and diagnose this, see if she's making sense or if she's completely full of crap. And I think that that's one thing here, is that one of the biggest things as a fan and as a coach in track and field, and this story broke as we were starting to fly, as we were starting to take off to come to the Olympic trials in Eugene, Oregon. We've got 11 athletes at the Olympic trials here, and so we're about to take off, and I see this just break on the news ticker, and I'm going, man, one of the biggest downfalls is that I think she's awesome. I thought she was like the sweetest person ever. I thought she was amazing, and that as a fan, that becomes a big struggle. So you start to play the game of it can't be right, it can't be accurate. You start to side with the individual, and we've got to keep that in perspective, that might not always be the right thing to do. But I digress, and I dive right into this article. Let's look at this. Houlihan says she's clean, and she's blaming the test result on a pork burrito that she got from a food truck in Beaverton, Oregon. Okay, so she's claiming that she got this positive test from a food truck. So we've got to start to think initially, is it legal to utilize nandrolone or Deca in pig farming, in livestock farming? So that's like the first key thing. And then the second key aspect that we've got to think about is, okay, nandrolone, what is it? Is it beneficial for distance runners to take it? So thinking about, is she guilty or is she not guilty? That's sort of the game that I like to play. So it's immediately, okay, are you allowed to actually utilize Deca or nandrolone when you're pig farming? And so one of the big things that NPR does a really good job with is they actually go and they interview Keith Nachman, who's a PhD at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and he said the steroid would be unlikely to be found inside pork. Nandrolone is not approved for use in any food animal, okay? So in the United States, nandrolone is not approved for use in any food animal. So remember, this test came from the end of December, or like middle of December. So this is also when COVID was essentially at its height. So we're under the assumption that if this pork wasn't raised in the US, it was brought in from an outside country during the height of COVID, okay, in December of 2020. So Nachman goes on to say nandrolone is not approved for use in any food animal, noting that it's illegal to use any steroid hormones in pig production. We only use them in cattle and sheep, that's it. So immediately, Nachman can punch a little bit of a hole inside of Houlihan's argument, because you're not allowed to use nandrolone inside pig farming. Now, the second step, why would a pig farmer go out and buy Deca, go out and buy nandrolone and inject his animals, or if it's a female, if she would inject her pigs with nandrolone. Okay, it will increase the size of their joints, it will increase their cartilage, it will increase lean muscle mass to a point. It is pretty potent, it's a good steroid. Bodybuilders use it quite frequently. But here's the key factor. It's not testosterone. It'll show up on a test as higher levels of testosterone, but testosterone is extremely cheap. Nandrolone is affordable, but is nowhere near as cheap as testosterone. So now we're under the assumption that pig farmers, my brother's a pig farmer, he struggles to pay his bills and he sells a ton of meat. He sells a ton of pork meat. He raises grass-fed pigs out on pasture and cures food, and he still struggles to pay his bills because it's not an overly profitable area. So now we're under the assumption that a farmer has the money to go buy nandrolone to see that direct economic return from more muscle mass, and that's not the case. So one, the first issue here is that nandrolone is not going to be used in pig farming. Two, a pig farmer is very, very, very unlikely going to actually utilize nandrolone because it's expensive. It's a lot cheaper to feed them a whole bunch of other garbage like grains, like corn. That's why people feed them corn and soybeans, because it's a lot cheaper. So Nachman goes on to continue saying, the only way it would be in there is if it was occurring naturally, and I don't know if that's the case. So this is a professor, this is a researcher at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Okay, so I trust that they have a pretty good individual that they're talking to. It is NPR, so they do a good job with everything. And he's the authority on the drugs that are used in animal production, specifically pork, chicken, and other meats. Now, Dr. Heather Fowler, who leads the National Pork Board's Division of Producer and Public Health, says that while uncastrated boars have been linked to nandrolone test results in the past, the meat from those animals make up only a small sliver of the market, a very, very small sliver. Some research suggests that the naturally occurring hormones in the meat and organs from intact male pigs can impact nandrolone test results, but the vast majority of the pork consumed in the US does not come from boars, okay? So it's important to think right there, if you have a male pig that is not castrated, they might have a little bit higher levels of nandrolone in their meat, but that's a very, very small percentage, and it's probably like 0.05% of the meat production. So it's unlikely that that's even going to be inside of that pork burrito. Referring to the same research, Nachman noted that the most male piglets raised in the US are actually barrows, which means that's where wheelbarrows comes from. They're castrated males. Non-castrated pigs are much less appealing to taste. So, okay, when we're talking about is nandrolone going to be present in the meat, it's really, really unlikely. So that's a first strike directly against Shelby Houlihan, is that her argument, it's a little bit suspect. Now, let's go back to what her argument is, right? Or what her statements are again. Anti-doping officials don't agree with the runner. They've handed Houlihan a 4-year ban just before US Olympic trials. I feel completely devastated, lost, broken, angry, confused, and betrayed by the very sport. She posted that on her Instagram feed. Houlihan, 28, is now banned from this year's Summer Olympics and Paris Olympics because of the 4-year ban, and she's pledging to fight. I'm going to continue to fight for my innocence. I absolutely respect and wholeheartedly support the fight to catch athletes who disrespect the sport by cheating and doping. But I'm not one of them, she claims. So I think it's also important to try to look at this from a very logical perspective. I find it really, really suspicious that during this time frame, and the reason why I know this is I have a ton of athletes inside the testing pool, okay? WADA and USADA. Hundreds of tests occur at my gym over the last 2 to 3 years, and dozens of my athletes have been tested by WADA and USADA. None of them have ever tested positive. Now, if they would test positive, we've got to look at it and do the same issue here. Now, one of the things that I'm struggling with, she tested positive in December, and so what's sort of strange to me is that there was a dead period of drug testing that anybody in USADA knew they weren't getting drug tested. There was a period of about 6 to 8 months where USADA wasn't going around drug testing. So she knew USADA wasn't going out drug testing all the way through December. Okay, they started, I believe in January, they started to drug test again of 2021. So it's very, very suspicious. Now, on top of that, it's suspicious from the perspective of, is nandrolone going to be beneficial for a distance runner? And if you can look at it from the perspective of, it's used in burn victims, so people who are in a fire or they have road rash or anything along those lines, they can get diagnosed or they can get treated, prescribed nandrolone, because it really, really helps skin grow back. It helps joints grow back. And on top of that, we're seeing doctors utilize TRT, so testosterone replacement therapy, with patients who also have severe arthritis or joint pain. Okay, so they'll get prescribed a low dose level of TRT, and then they'll also get nandrolone. There's doctors that do this, okay? So the problem where I'm going with this is that distance running can really, really beat up your hips, your lower back, your ankles, your knees. There's a lot of volume, a lot of tension on your joints. So that's the next discussion. Would nandrolone help Shelby Houlihan? Yes, for sure. And a lot of bodybuilders stay healthy for long periods of time because they take nandrolone to help with joint integrity. So for sure, she would actually benefit quite a bit from utilizing nandrolone. So now let's get into this further. We concluded that the most likely explanation was a burrito purchased and consumed approximately 10 hours before the drug test from an authentic Mexican food truck that serves pig offal near my house in Beaverton. Let's jump into that statement. She was drug tested 10 hours after she ate pig offal burrito the night before, and she was able, a month after she got tested, she got the notification that she got popped. She went back into her food logs and had it written down that she had eaten at a Mexican food truck. And I use MyFitnessPal, I've used other apps to track my food. Very, very, very rarely do I put exactly where and what I ate from specific locations. I might add in 6 ounces of chicken, 8 ounces of beef, 8 ounces of beef with beans and cilantro or a salad, whatever, salsa. That would be how it would typically appear in most people's food log. It's very, very unlikely that she wrote in there, I had pig offal from this Mexican, authentic Mexican truck in Beaverton, Oregon on this specific day, and she's able to go back and find that. So that's another thing. Now, let's go even further. How many people do you know? Now, I am someone who eats liver, heart. I've eaten kidneys. The kidneys taste terrible, but liver and heart, even eyeballs. I've eaten this stuff. How many people do you know who would go to an authentic Mexican truck and get pig offal burritos over carnitas? So now we have to believe that she likes pig organ flavoring better than carnitas? Are you kidding me? There's no chance. If you're going to a Mexican food truck, you are getting the only time that you are gonna get anything out of the ordinary, I would be if you got lingua or tongue. You would get tongue, but that would typically be from a cow. You would get lingua, burrito, or shaved up tongue because it's very, very tender. You might get tripe soup. Tripe soup would be the stomach lining, okay? I've had tripe soup from a Mexican food truck. That could be another way. But you would get pig offal, you would buy liver or kidney or any type of organ meat over carnitas or barbacoa or lingua, anything like that. No chance. There is no way that she went to a Mexican food truck and decided that, for today, I'm gonna have pig organs. That's what I really want for today. That's not happening. So on top of that, we can get into, all right, what are the odds that this actually happened? So let's say, did this actually happen? And there's 2 cases that come to my mind that this has actually occurred where athletes got a lesser sentence. A.G. Wilson, and what ends up happening is she was buying beef from a Walmart, and she had kept buying beef. She's an 800 runner, and I think she's still training. She was very, very good. And she tested positive. She got a 6-month ban because she was able to go back to the Walmart where she was buying beef, give it to the lab, and proved that beef was high in what she had tested positive for. And it begins with an R, I think it was like Revenol or something along those lines, that's solely used to add mass to beef production. So remember, back to that beginning, Nachman says, we only are allowing drugs to be utilized for beef and for sheep, okay? So A.G. Wilson's one. The second one that comes to mind, Will Clay, 2018, tested positive for clenbuterol. So let's go back to A.G. Wilson quickly, actually. So with A.G. Wilson, is that a drug that's really gonna help her with our sport? Probably not, okay? Now we go into Will Clay and clenbuterol. He tested positive in Mexico for a trace amount, and they specified a trace amount of clenbuterol. And if my memory serves me correctly, he got away with no ban. He might have had like a 3-month ban, but I'm pretty sure he got away with it because he was able to prove that what he was eating was indeed tainted with clenbuterol, and because he had trace amounts of clenbuterol, he was able to show, like, look, I'm not taking this. And on top of that, it's a pathetic anabolic steroid. It's not gonna really help a triple jumper or a long jumper. It might a little bit, but not trace amounts. So that's also important to recognize that this argument has been utilized in the past and proven out and helped people, but only because they knew that beef is tainted. So one of the big issues here is that, and this is where it comes to a problem, is that Houlihan says the testing process was flawed. Of course she does. Houlihan and the coaches at her track club in Oregon said they've never heard of nandrolone before learning of a positive out of competition test result in January. Here's a big strike, okay? If you're an elite athlete and you don't know what nandrolone is, and you're the head of one of the biggest track clubs in the entire United States and you've never heard of nandrolone, you're pathetic and you're a liar. And there's two cases here. You're either pathetic because you're one of the best distance runners in the entire world, you're one of the best coaches and one of the best track clubs in the entire United States, and you don't know what nandrolone is? You don't know what DECA is? That would be like me not knowing what EPO is. You have to know this stuff. If you have athletes inside of your club that are getting drug tested on a regular basis, which I know that Bowerman's Track Club is, we at Garage Strength have a whole parking spot for USADA. That's how often we're getting drug tested. We know almost every single drug that's illegal based off of WADA and USADA. So if you don't know what nandrolone is, one of the most potent steroids and one of the most popular steroids, you don't know what DECA is, you are a liar. So that's a big problem I have right here, is that her coach, I didn't even know what nandrolone is. Well, then you didn't do your due diligence. If you have athletes getting drug tested, you should know all of these drugs so that you're aware. That's how it works. Okay, so I want to be very clear. I have never taken any performance enhancing substances, and that includes that of which I'm being accused. She said she had passed a polygraph test, but there's no proving result. She had a hair sample analysis done that she says found no buildup of the steroid in her body. Hair samples are worthless. They're not good tests. She did not respond to a request for comment. Houlihan, her coach, Jerry Schumacher, who claims he never heard of nandrolone, and that means you suck as a coach if you never heard of nandrolone, claims that she's a victim of a broken process, and throughout the process, we were confident that the truth would lead to justice. Okay, so I believe here that what is going on and some of the big issues, she represented us in Rio. She did really well in Doha in 2019. This is my final analysis, is that, again, the odds of her buying pig organ meat over standard burrito meat is very, very slim. The odds of her buying pig organ burrito that's also tainted with non-castrated pork meat that might have a little bit of nandrolone in it is also very, 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 very unlikely, especially at the height of COVID, when we're almost importing no outside meat sources because of COVID. And then again, the fact that in the US, you can't use nandrolone on pork products. And then finally, it's ironic that this positive test happens when you know USADA isn't doing any testing. So those are 4 huge strikes against you. And then you say ignorant statements like your coach and you never even heard of nandrolone, when the first thing that USADA does when you go through testing, when you go through education as a coach on a yearly basis, they're sending you emails. They send you emails every week. And when your athletes get negative tests, you still get notifications that they're negative, and you still get information on how to improve your knowledge around these drugs. And you didn't do the due diligence to learn what those drugs are. That means you're not a good coach, and you're most likely lying about the entire situation. So to react to Shelby Houlihan, it is highly, highly unlikely that her story holds up. I believe that she knew that USADA wasn't testing during this time frame, so she knew she could potentially get away with something. She might have had some joint problems. She might have had some ligament issues, and she knew that DECA would help a little bit, especially if she took a lower level of that. I believe that she is completely lying about even buying pork burritos that are made from organ meat. I believe it's much more likely she was taking nandrolone because it's pretty relatively easy to get. On top of that, the fact that the meat at the stand would even be using non-castrated pig meat that might have a slight bit of nandrolone is highly unlikely. And then finally, we've got to remember what the professor from Johns Hopkins stated. You are not allowed to use DECA/nandrolone when we're treating pork livestock. You are only allowed to use that with beef and with sheep. She's got a lot of holes in her argument. She's likely a drug user, a drug cheat, and that's one of the biggest struggles as a fan of track and field, is that now you take somebody that you hold in very high regard and your whole perception of reality changes. And that's an important concept here, is that what can we do? What can we take away from today, from learning? Be aware of what drugs are potentially gonna get you to piss hot. Be aware of where that source could be coming from, and make sure you know your food sources. Make sure you know what's going inside your body. That's one of the key factors that USADA and WADA always present to you. And just keep in mind, this test came when USADA was not testing. So there's a lot stacked up against Shelby Houlihan in this regard, and I believe she's a dirty user. So if you want more information about how to become a better athlete, click on the link down below, head over to garagestrength.com, and you can pick up one of our training programs to help you become a better athlete. If you want more content around drug usage, cheating, supplements, anything along these lines, click on this card right here. Until next time, guys, peace.